Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program about Said Nursi and Risale Academy today with Mr. Kerim Balci as our guest speaker today. And we will be talking about Said Nursi and his epistles of light in a context of history and hermeneutics. And these concepts will be explained in a good detail, inshallah. So I would like to start by announcing that this is an interesting program because it coincided with the Father's Day celebrations. And we are talking about Said Nursi. Is he the son of his time or is he the father of his time? So we will go into these Sufi concepts in detail, but I really felt special for this program that it coincided without us planning it around it. It is a plan that is made by the creator that he wanted us to talk about these concepts in this special day. Inshallah, it will be a deep and very well understood program, I have no doubt, inshallah. So the concepts today we will talk about is Nursi, Bediuzzaman Said Nursi, a son of his time, and how and why Epistles of Light, a book collection about the Quran, commentary of the Quran, written 100 years ago, are still relevant to our problems today. And what is the context and how the context and the text are related with each other, and how relevant the life of the author is to better understanding of the work. We will talk about these concepts with Mr. Kerim Balci, and let me introduce him in shortly. He needs no introduction at all. But for those who are new in this program, Kerim Balci is a Turkish writer, journalist, academic, and human rights activist. He is recently the chief advisor of London-based Human Rights Solidarity and works as a communication officer at London Advocacy, a litigation-based human rights advocacy firm. Balci served as the editor-in-chief of Turkish Review and as a columnist at Today's Zaman and Zaman dailies before these publications were shut down by the Turkish government. Balci studied his BA in physics and political science at Boğaziçi University of Turkey, his MA in Islam and Modern Middle East at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and his PhD on linguistics at Durham University of the United Kingdom. He is currently an LLM student at Leeds Law School of the UK. He lectures at the Respect Graduate School on topics like Islamic logic, epistemology, and hermeneutics. I would like to announce before we start that our Risale Academy School is becoming a reality soon, inshallah, in September. And the announcements, this is the first announcement of the school, that these colloquium lectures that we have been introducing different guest speakers on the topics that they have researched on are becoming a Risale Academy School where anybody who is interested in these concepts in Risale collection, anybody who wants to study these concepts in a semi-academic setting, will be able to enroll through Respect Graduate School on these courses, and we will have 3 stages, 3 levels of courses. In each level, we will introduce 2 courses that are related to the work of Nursi. So before I take too much time, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Kerim Balci. I'm trying to help myself not to call you Dr. Kerim Balci because that comes from my heart. But Mr. Kerim Balci will start his views on the topic, and we will do our best to make it interactive. And in the meantime, those who follow us on YouTube channel, please feel free to share your questions with us, because we think that the topic becomes deeper and understood better when there are interactions, when there are questions on the topic. So feel free to share them on the chat screen, and I will, inshallah, make sure to ask them as long as our time allows us. So welcome, Mr. Kerim Balci, and please, the floor is yours, and tell us about your topic and what we are going to talk about today.
Thank you very much. Today, I am going to try to introduce two Sufi concepts into a hermeneutical discussion. First of all, I have to explain what is the hermeneutical discussion here. Well, this is not a new discussion. Together with the introduction of biblical hermeneutics into a better understanding of holy texts of Christianity and Judaism back in early 19th and late 19th centuries, European theologians and academics started to discuss the relevance of the historical context that the holy texts of Judaism and Christianity were revealed. So the question was this: the Old Testament is believed to have been revealed in a historical context that started somewhere around 1600 BC and continued until somewhere around 600 BC, so before the Common Era. So it's about 1,000 years of revelation, starting from Moses, the first recipient of the revelation of Torah, the first 5 books, or Pentateuch if you wish, and ending with Prophet Balci in the 6th century BC. Of course, the holy texts of Judaism does not end there. Then starts an era of Mishnah, and then continues an era of Talmud, which actually reached to the age of our prophet, peace be upon him, the 6th century after the Common Era. So it suddenly makes about 2 millennia of holy text formation. And of course, biblical hermeneuticians, or if you wish, commentators, have come up with this question mark. Are the things that were quite valid for the time of Moses in Egypt are still valid for people who are living in Canada in a digital era and so on? So the question mark here was how the difference between the historical, cultural, socio-economic context of the author, if you wish, or the first recipient is relevant to a better understanding of the text or the message in a completely different context. So normally, if you look at a text, for example, if I wrote you an email today, and we did write each other several messages for this program, by and large, we are living in the same cultural milieu. So my context and your context are not having any significant effect on how we do understand and on how we express ourselves, because we are in the same context. By and large, when an author of a text writes down his work, he never thinks about a possible future time that a future generation of readers will be approaching his work from a completely different perspective because of their historical context. For example, I always love this example. In the New Testament, Jesus asks this question to his disciples: who is more clever, the person who builds his house on a stone or on the sand? Well, at that time, it was a time of floods and all kinds of problems. So the logical answer was on the stone. Okay. Well, nowadays we are building our cities on the sand. Okay. We don't go up to the mountains because it's much easier to deal with all kinds of public amenities and so on the plate areas. Now, things have changed. Well, this is a simple example, but for the biblical hermeneuticians, this was an existential question, because in the end, several biblical hermeneuticians reached to the conclusion that the Old Testament and the New Testament are all historical texts that are relevant only for their own historical contexts. They do not say anything to us, because we are living completely in different contexts. And if they are anything for us, if they mean anything for us, they are fantastic stories. Like, for example, take this. You might be a sincere believer in God, in prophets. You might still believe that some people perform miracles, okay? But you have never seen one. You never experienced it. Okay? In fact, if anything came closer to be labeled as a wonder or a miracle, you have an inclination to deny it. You have an inclination to say, am I asleep? Is this a dream? Or did I see it correct? Or so on. Because you are living in a materialistic era, despite the fact that you have convinced yourselves that such things might happen. You also have an inclination to think that they never happen, okay? Because we are living in such an era. Well, you are reading in the Old Testament and in the Quran, in the Bible, that a person feeds 4,000 people out of 2 fishes, okay? In the New Testament. You read in the Old Testament that Moses had a hand that once came out of his chest, gave light, that he actually separated the sea into 2, that he actually extracted water from a stone for 12 tribes. And these are amazing, amazing stories. And usually the mindset of a modern man is inclined towards looking at them from a literary perspective. And they are inclined to say, well, these are pedagogical stories in order to convince the audience that Moses was an amazing guy, but of course exaggerated and so on. Well, the biblical hermeneutics reached to a conclusion of historicity or historicism. Muslim intellectuals, Muslim commentators have resisted to the call of hermeneutical criticism and to the call of historicist criticism. Because if you look at the Quran or the traditions attributed to our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from an historicist perspective, you will reach to a conclusion that the Quran belongs to the 7th or late 6th century, and it doesn't say anything to me. And in fact, there are modernist, reformist, so-called reformist Muslim intellectuals who have started to deny or decline some of the content of the Quran on the basis that this was only relevant for that era. Now we are living in a completely different era. We do not need to abide by those rules because those rules were only about those times. Right? Now, I'm not going to enter into that discussion as it relates to how we should read the Quran or how we should approach to the body of Sirah, the biography of our beloved Prophet. But we have in our hand a text that is really written by a human being. So it is not a holy text. The Epistles of Light is not a holy text. Of course, the author claims, and I do believe, that he was receiving some kind of inspiration, divine guidance on what to write and how to write and so on. And many people, I do believe, do still continue on receiving inspiration on that sense. I'm not saying Said Nursi was unique in that sense. But in the end, it was his words. And in fact, he played with the words, he re-edited them, reviewed them, changed them, and so on. So it's not a holy text. So we are free to speak about the basic question of hermeneutical criticism. How relevant is the context that Said Nursi was born is to the better understanding of the text. Now, the point is, a majority of people, when they read the Quran, they do not know anything about the 6th century Arabian Peninsula context. Okay? Whenever they have any slight information, they usually think, for example, that it should be a desert, okay? But it's not. You know, Mecca is quite close to the Red Sea, and Medina has a beautiful weather. Okay? It's not far away from the Red Sea, and the climate is quite benign climate and so on. And there are trees, and there were even more trees at that time and so on. So our understanding is wrong. So with that different understanding or defected understanding of the context, we usually approach to the Quran and make some silly mistakes, forgive the word. Now, when it comes to reading the Epistles of Light, my question is this. We are speaking in English. Our audience are usually approaching to the text of the Risale Nur, Epistles of Light, from among their English cultures, English reading cultures. They are most probably reading the Epistles of Light from a translation which lacks contextual notes. So they usually do not understand what's going on. They shouldn't be able to understand. They can, of course, think about an imagined context which is quite similar to ours. I always give this example. When you read the Epistles of Light, you will find Said Nursi as a staunch critique of secularism. Okay? Well, to a Western mind, secularism is good. In fact, it is one of the ultimate perfections that human society have ever reached to. And if you do not realize that Said Nursi was speaking from within a context of a French colonial secularism that was applied in Turkey, which Professor Ahmet Kuru labels as assertive secularism, where religion and state was not separate from each other. In fact, the state replaced religion as the new religion or civic religion, and the state imposed its own understanding of religiosity on the religious people by, for example, forcing the people to recite the call for prayer not in its original Arabic, but in Turkish translation. And in fact, the Turkish translation is even an abnormal modernist Turkish translation. So instead of calling Allah as Allah, the Arabic and Turkish word, using the modern Turkish word Tanrı, which is devoid of all sanctious content. So it is deity in English, any deity. So Nursi was living in such a context, and his criticism of secularism is not a criticism of Anglo-Saxon version of secularism. It is a criticism of a French colonial secularism, which was even not applied in France, but in Algeria. So that version of secularism has been criticized by Said Nursi. If that contextual note is missing, our audience might, at best, misunderstand Said Nursi. At worst, totally fail to understand or even give up reading Said Nursi. So my question is here, how much the context is relevant to a better understanding of Said Nursi? And I use two concepts that I actually took as loan from the Sufi dictionary, because Said Nursi does the same. He has taken several phrases from the dictionary of Arabic grammar, like manai harfi or manai ismi, and used them for theological means. So I'm going to use Ibn al-Zaman or Ibn al-Waqt, because there are different pronunciations, which means the son of his time or the time. and al-Waqt, which means the father of the time. Ibn Arabi uses a different phrase. He says abid al-Waqt, meaning the worshipper of time. But these are all referring to a similar content. In a Sufi context, Ibn al-Zaman or Ibn al-Waqt, the son of the time, means this. First of all, Sufis do not look at waqt. In Arabic, it means time. Not in the regular understanding of time, but in a very Sufi understanding of time. For a Sufi understanding, waqt, time, means the time you spend with God. The time you realize the existence and strong and controlling, imposing existence of God with all your internal subtleties and so on, with your heart and mind and so on. So that is the time. So this is this very special time, the time you spend with God. So at the pilgrimage of a person, pilgrimage for perfection in the Sufi path, the pilgrim reaches a level of becoming Ibn al-Waqt or Ibn al-Zaman, the son of the time. This means the time when the Sufi reaches to a certain level of perfection that he or she is no longer concerned with the issues or problems of the past or the future. He is only living in the current time. And current time is the time you spend with God. Okay? So think of it like this. You fall in love with another person and you are spending time with him or her. Well, that's not the time to think about the issues of the past. That's not the time to think about the issues of the future. Just try to take maximum out of the time you are spending with your beloved one. Well, Sufi looks at Allah as the beloved one. And that is the time you spend with Allah, and anything other than Allah should be banned from your concerns and thoughts and so on. Now, this is Sufi context. Of course, in the Sufi understanding, Ibn al-Waqt is one stage. And in a further stage, there is Abu al-Waqt, the father of the time. The father of the time continues on the path of perfection further on, and he or she relieves himself or herself from any time, from all other worldly, any concern. It's because being with God relieves you from any concern. Now, you are not any longer time bound. You are not bound with anything in this world anymore. So it is basically two stages in the path of perfection for the Sufi. Of course, I'm not going to be speaking about Sufi issues. I'm going to be using those concepts in order to show today in this episode that Said Nursi was also an Ibn al-Waqt, particularly at the old Said period, the young Said period. Said Nursi was an Ibn al-Waqt, meaning he was a product of his time. So it is better to know the context, historical and cultural context, in order to better understand why, for example, in 1908, when Sultan Abdul Hamid was actually taken off the throne and with a military coup, and the Party of Freedom, the Freedom Party, established a new regime. Said Nursi supported the coup. We have to look at that issue. Many people in Turkey and the Muslim world would actually find it quite difficult to understand the criticism of Said Nursi against Sultan Abdul Hamid II, because there is this perception that Sultan Abdul Hamid II was actually quite a religious person, in fact, at the level of becoming a Muslim saint and so on. So he is adored because of his resistance against Zionist project and so on. And of course, he ruled over the Ottoman state for 30 years with quite a bit of success. But his imagery is untouchable. Well, Said Nursi also has a similar imagery, but Said Nursi was against Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Not only Said Nursi, many religious intellectuals of the time were quite critical of the authoritarian policies of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Well, if you do not have the knowledge of the context, you wouldn't be able to understand. When you read the works of old Said, even in the New Said period works, you may find, for example, a reference to a comet that came close to the world, and everybody spent days and nights outside in the streets. Well, if you didn't know that this was actually the comet Halley, that usually comes every other 72 years close by, and I remember in 1984 or 85, it passed close to the world, then we were all, asking this question whether it is going to hit the world, the Earth, and so on. Well, back in 1912, the same issue was discussed. Of course, at that time, they didn't have the telescopes and so on that we now have. So people were quite concerned. Thousands of people spent the nights, several nights, outside waiting for an imminent apocalyptic hit by a comet. Well, when you know that, suddenly Said Nursi's reference to uncontrolled comet hitting to the world becomes meaningful. In Said Nursi's writings, many people find this perplexing. Said Nursi refers to a particular mindset of Western educated people as dealing with the discussion of how many eggs are produced by American chickens. Well, Said Nursi precisely says this. These people are, asking this question about how many eggs American chickens are producing. Well, if you didn't know that this was a huge discussion, a very funny but very commonplace discussion in the late Ottoman era in Istanbul about modernization, and names like Babanzadeh Naim and the other Western educated intellectuals of Turkey were trying to show to the Ottoman intelligentsia that through a model of Fordism, Americans has managed to produce more eggs than the Ottomans, despite the fact that they have less amount of chickens and so on. Well, the discussion was a real discussion. And when that context is also provided, suddenly the old Said's tasks become, well, they take on life. Suddenly you realize that Said, Bediuzzaman Said Nursi, was a real man. He was living in the streets. He was writing everything he wrote from within and life experience. Things were discussed and so on. Many people, for example, do not realize why Said Nursi adores the Japanese model of development so much. Well, many Ottoman intellectuals of that time thought that the Japanese managed to take technology of the West, but also declined taking the culture of the West. So for the religiously motivated intellectuals of late Ottoman era, this was the solution. But the point is, the observation about the Japanese model was a wrong observation. The Japanese didn't do that. The Japanese actually took both the culture and the technology of the West. But they managed to keep some of the folkloric elements of historical Japanese dances and clothing and so on. That's it. I know Japanese friends, they lament for the loss of their historical values on the face of Westernization and so on. Why this happened like that? Because a certain Abdul Rashid Ibrahim, this was a traveling Muslim intellectual. By the way, I'm going to remind you, Zuleyha, that you promised me to intervene from time to time.
I'm actually about to.
Okay, so let me finish. Let me finish this one.
Okay.
This Abdul Rashid Ibrahim is an amazing traveler at the late 19th century. He lived in Russia, Muslim. He traveled all around the Muslim world, and he reached to Japan. And this person had a particular sympathy towards the Japanese people. And he came to the Ottoman capital, and he was trying to garner some financial support for a mosque to be built in Tokyo. And in the end, he managed to build that mosque. So in order to promote people to donate for the project, particularly the Sultan, he told the Istanbul intelligentsia, intellectuals, that the Japanese people were almost undeclared Muslims. You know, they lived like Muslims, they behaved like Muslims, but they were not, they only didn't know Muhammad. And if they knew it, everything would change. The same he taught about the Indonesian, Java people and so on, or Filipinos at that time. Well, many people took those stories for face value, and Said Nursi was one among them. If you read Mehmed Akif's Safahat, this is a famous poem of the late Ottoman era, you will also find there stories about the Japanese, about the Filipinos, about the Java people, how amazing they are, and so on. These are all Abdul Rashid Ibrahim's own subjective observations of those societies. Now, that context is missing. Because that context is missing, usually our understanding of Said Nursi is also missing. So I am trying to promote a contextual reading of the Epistles of Light, particularly the works of the old Said and the life story of the late or third Said, particularly when he started to support the Democratic Party. Without the contextual note, we will never be able to understand why he openly supported a political party, despite the fact that for about 30 years, he continually advocated keeping out of politics. Well, that's a good point. Let me stop here.
I would like to thank you very much for stopping. It was breathtaking. Every point that you're making to follow and to see what you're coming into. I actually, I'm in awe. I couldn't even interfere. But thank you for giving me the opportunity. So what I understand from your argument so far is that culture and history creates a context for the text. And without this context, we cannot dive into the depth of the text. Is that true? And I want to also connect it to the Risale Nur collection in general, and also to the Quranic context, Quranic understanding, because the Risale collection for us is the bridge to the Quran. So we need to use the same argument for the Quran as well. So my question is, I'm sure you will talk about that. That's why this is the counter argument. So if we are, so you are suggesting that for someone to read Risale Nur and understand it according to the time and the culture that we are living in from within this time, and to understand and make it relevant to our lives, we need to know the historical context of it. We need to know the history of why Said Nursi, you know, at the time that he lived in, did certain choices and did certain comments. I think it makes sense. But for me, the question is, are we suggesting anybody who is interested in Risale Nur to take a history course on Said Nursi's life? This is my first question. The second question is, how do we understand this in relation to the essence of the Risale Nur collection? The subjects of Tawheed and Nubuwwah, you know, the prophethood, you know, the Akhirah, you know, these are the main topics that Said Nursi is trying to, you know, unravel them for us who, you know, the individuals who are living at this time, to connect with the Quran. So if we are bound with history and historical details, is this, you know, supporting us to be in the center of the issues at hand in Risale Nur?
Thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, I love to be challenged. So the particular challenge and the second question is a valuable one. But let me first deal with the first one. Do we need to know history or culture in order to better understand any work that is written in a historical context? Well, both yes and No. Yes, for a particular text which deals with issues that are time-bound, where the author is Ibn al-Waqt, meaning the son of his time. But yes, there are other texts, particularly the text that you have mentioned, which are existential, universal. They are not time-bound, which are about issues like life and death, the meaning of life in this world. Where are we going in this world? Well, the classical philosophical question: who am I? Where am I coming from? Where am I going? What I have to do in this world, and so on. These are universal questions that have been busying humankind from the first human end till the end. It will continue on. These are not time-bound issues. Now, when the author manages to move away from the actuality of the context or of the text towards an existential topic that deals with issues like fate, questioning of our duty on this world, and so on, or basic philosophical issues, then the author becomes Abul Waqt, the father of his time. And his text becomes relevant in completely different cultural contexts also. So the question of, is there a God, does not have anything to do with historical context, because it is relevant in every historical or geographic context. Okay? But a question like, should I support a democratic party or an authoritarian party, is a historical context question. And that was precisely the question that Said Nursi answered in 1908 as saying, I am going to support the Democratic Party, despite the fact that that Democratic Party also had issues by means of use of violence to change the society and so on. Now, whenever we are dealing with a text that is time-bound, we have to move into the context that the text was created or revealed. That is very important. Even if the text is revealed, like the Quran or the Bible and so on, we cannot simply say, well, this is a divine text, so it does not have anything to do with the historical context it was revealed into. No. Our Lord, even if you sincerely believe that the words in the Bible, and I do believe in the Quran, are the words of our Lord Allah, but our Lord is speaking to human beings. So the logic suggests that our Lord wanted to be understood. So our Lord is not a Lord that will send us a puzzle. Okay? So the text of the Quran is formulated to be best understood by the initial recipients of the Quran. Then suddenly, the culture, the linguistic manners, in fact, vocabulary of the initial recipients of the Quran becomes relevant for a better understanding of the Quranic verses that relate to time. But not all the Quranic verses relate to time. And in fact, even when they relate to a time, that doesn't mean they are relevant or they are valid only for that time. You can certainly take out lessons from a story that is valid from that time. For example, if the story of a battle, we do study in war academies the stories of various battles. For example, Waterloo battle. This is a must in every military academy to study. But this took place 100 years ago, several hundred years ago. This is not a new thing. There wasn't tanks, there wasn't air jets at that time. They didn't have A-bombs and so on. Not Napoleon, not the British and so on. But we still can learn strategy from the Waterloo battle. So even if the thing is time-bound, doesn't mean it is only valid in that time. It still can say something to a different context. But in order to be able to move away from the context of the original information and apply it to your new context, you have to be able to know the both, okay? A person who does not know, I'm going to suggest a hypothetical situation of a human being that is unknowledgeable about his own context, okay? So think of a person who doesn't know where he is, who doesn't know what is the climate he is living in. This is a hypothetical situation. Such a person cannot understand any reference to time, any reference to geography, okay? So, and missing knowledge about the context of the reader or a missing knowledge about the context of the author is both problematic for a better understanding of the message. Well, of course, there is this question: what is understanding? Classically, the Aristotelian understanding of understanding is to reach to the intention of the author. Okay, but in the postmodern era, the intention of the author is completely denied. Well, intentional fallacy in 1960s became a hit in all literary criticism academies, but we never can reach to the intention of the author. In fact, we shouldn't care because we have the text in front of us and we built the information, the knowledge. What we say understanding is actually a product of the dialogue between the text and the reader's own context. That understanding, this is a post-structuralist approach or deconstructionist approach to understanding. They say, like Stanley Fish says, I don't care about the context of the writer, author. I don't care about the author. In fact, the author is dead. In fact, this is precisely why Nietzsche said, God is dead. Nietzsche's reference is not to the God that created the universe. It is the God that writes the text, the author. The author is dead. Whenever the author is dead, God is dead also, because God is the author of the holy texts. Now, let me turn back to the second question. Are we going to suggest people to read history, to take a history course? Well, in this second episode, I'm going to suggest that Said Nursi skillfully put hints of the context that he was living in into the text. So the relationship between a text and the context is twofold. First of all, every text is a product of a context. So a better understanding of the context helps you to understand what the text is about. But every text is also a creator of a new context. So we cannot just take Risale Nur, Epistles of Light, out of history of Turkey. In fact, without a better understanding of history of late Ottoman Empire, we cannot understand Risale Nur, Epistles of Light, yes, but without a better understanding of Risale Nur, we cannot understand the Republican era. Because Said Nursi is a huge figure. He actually became al-Waqt, meaning he changed the culture. Today in Turkey, you cannot communicate without the vocabulary that was actually forged by Said Nursi. Like, for example, Jawshan. Okay? We didn't know this word. Jawshan means shield, and it is the name of a particular prayer reportedly recited by our prophet with a divine source. It is basically about 1,000 names or attributes of God. It's called Jawshan, shield. Well, Said Nursi made this famous among Turkish Muslims. It was known to Naqshbandis, it was known to Shias before, but not the Turkish audience, particularly because the Republican era of secularization and modernization had cut off our ties with the Islamic tradition. We had lost our understanding of Islamic vocabulary and so on. So Said Nursi was actually reviving the generation from within the language. So he actually managed to build a new language, which Sherif Mardin calls idiom, or Yusuf Kaplan calls meta-language. So it is impossible to understand. If somebody gives you an account or a narrative of Turkish history, modern Turkish history, without any reference to Bediuzzaman Said Nursi, he fails. You cannot understand modern Turkey without referring to Epistles of Light, because Epistles of Light is not just a book that people read, it is a culture-creating book. The same is true for the Quran to a much higher level. We can, of course, not say that the Quran is a product of the historical context it was revealed into, but we can certainly say that our Lord took the context of revelation of the Quran into consideration in whatever way the Quran was revealed. So the historical context is still relevant. Mm-hmm. But Quran is also very much relevant to a better understanding of history of Islam. A majority of Islamic history is only understandable through a lens of Quranic reading. Quran changed Arabic. The language changed because of the Quran. Well, to a much lesser extent, Risale Nur changed Turkish. Particularly the readers of Risale Nur, they speak a much higher sophisticated Turkish language. Sometimes the seculars who have never approached books like Risale Nur would say, did you come out of history? What language you are speaking? What that means, and so on. So people like us, I can say we are using a Turkish language 4 or 5 times richer than the average person in the street in Turkey. Why? Mm-hmm. Thanks to Said Nursi. And that language, it has all actually built a new culture. And that culture is also relevant to understand history. So what I am claiming is, as an Ibn al-Waqt, Said Nursi is the son of his time. We need to know a bit about history, a bit about the cultural milieu he was born into, particularly when we're translating his books into other languages. We have to put some contextual notes in order to help the people. And then Said Nursi also is Abul Waqt. He is the father of his time. He is the master of the era, because he actually changed the era. He actually built a new culture whereby from within the materialistic naturalist tradition, a new culture of faith was built.
Mm-hmm. If you would allow me to interfere here, you have included in the discussion the component of language. And we received a very good question from the audience, which I think it is relevant. And if you allow me, I would put it here as a question. The person whose name is Mayer asks, I think the context point is quite critical. So how can one get through in his or her understanding of Risale if one doesn't speak Turkish?
Well, that's a beautiful question, but I have to underline, many Turkish speakers are equally unable to penetrate to the language of Risale Nur. Risale Nur is written with a highly sophisticated language, which includes Arabic, Persian, occasionally French words, occasionally Kurdish words also. So many Turkish speakers also are perplexed in front of the language of the Risale Nur. And occasionally, particularly people who want to read Risale Nur not because they believe Risale Nur is going to solve their problems or lead them intellectually or by means of their spiritually, but only because they want to learn what on earth this particular guy wrote about these issues academically. They prefer reading from English. because the English translation seems to be more understandable, more plain. But the point is, Said Nursi didn't choose that language only because he was using that language in daily life. He wasn't using that language in daily life. People like Hilmi Ziaul Kam or Ahmet Hamdi Tanpınar, these are people who wrote at the same time with Said Nursi. Their language is not as sophisticated as Said Nursi's own language. Said Nursi intentionally chose to write in a very rich language. In fact, he made up Turkish words from Arabic roots that didn't exist neither in Arabic nor in Turkish until that time. So he was actually trying to push the Muslim mind to the playground of language, vocabulary. I always say, now, dictionary is the playground of the mind. Unfortunately, we, this modern age people, particularly the Twitter generation, we communicate with so little number of words that we do not realize the joy in entering into that playground and trying to build up new words, new concepts, and so on. That was a critical issue for Said Nursi. But the question is still valid. How will people of speakers of other languages are going to penetrate into the sometimes esoteric, sometimes historical crust of the original message in Risale Nur? Well, the point is this. Risale Nur was written and meant to be read in congregation. One particular strategy Said Nursi had established about a better understanding of Risale Nur was communal reading circles. Well, including this particular conversation, this is a communal or common reading experiment. Said Nursi suggested that you should not read the Risale Nur on your own, always with others. Of course, that communal experiment will always have some more experienced people who can comment and so on. Some others are going to bring their own historical, socioeconomic aspects and so on to the issue. So Said Nursi didn't just wrote a book and left it to the mercy of the readers. In fact, many people in Western societies also do the same. Rabelais, for example, Rabelais is an author of fantastic, futuristic, absurdism, if you wish, novels. But at the beginning of every novel, he gives advices on how to sit and, actually, how to be drunk before reading his books and so on. So he gives advices. No author does not think about how I am going to be understood. Everybody has to, and if you are an author, you care about how people will understand you, and you try to put in some science, to lead the reader towards a particular understanding. Sometimes you use a Platonic understanding of giving birth to a feeling. You say, I don't know what you will understand out of this, but I'm going to show you how to reach to the truth, with my questions and so on. But sometimes you have a truth, or you believe that you have a truth, and Said Nursi believed that he had the ultimate truth. You have to give directions to the audience. So Said Nursi created or used that language precisely because he wanted people to come into that. And he gave us the advice of reading the Risale Nur as a communal experiment.
I would like to interfere here again. And Yonara, if you have questions, please feel free. I don't know if I have told this before, but Yonara and we have come together for a communal understanding of Risale. So that's how we, our friendship evolved over time. So she's familiar with what you have been talking about. I would like to ask a clarification question for our audience. You have mentioned the old Said and the new Said, the concepts that are historical. So could you clarify what you mean by this for the audience who are not familiar with the Risale Nur collection in general? The old
Well,
Said
that is precisely a contextual question. Okay, so many people wouldn't understand that, particularly in the English language. When you say old Said, old both means historically previous, but also it means aged. Okay, and new both means new by means of historical chronology, meaning it is a new, but it also means young. Okay, so you wouldn't, if you are an English reader, you might actually think that new Said was the early Said and the old Said is the late Said. Okay, but the fact is the converse, the opposite. Old Said is young Said, and the new Said is old Said, okay, or is the aged Said. And in fact, in the Turkish versions, you might sometimes find eski, old, not aged, but old historically, and also sometimes genç, young. Well, the point is this, not very different from Imam Ghazali or from people like Saint Augustine in Christian context, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Said Nursi passed through an intellectual midlife crisis and metamorphosis that moved his style and the content of his writings away from philosophical and political issues towards more existential and religious theological issues. This took place somewhere between 1915 and 1924. So it was almost 10 years of intellectual questioning. And during those years, Said Nursi was not idle. In fact, the Isharatul Ijaz, his first commentary on the very first verses of the Quran, was written in 1915. So it was the beginning of the intellectual questioning in his mind. And Masnawi and Nuriya, the Masnawi of Said Nursi, was written during 1922, 21, 22, I think some parts 23 also. These were the latest years of his metamorphosis, intellectual metamorphosis. Of course, prior to that crisis, Said Nursi created the short epistles like Munazarat and Muhakamat, the discussions and arguments, well, arguments and the discussions. And also he wrote two logic books, one Kızıl Ijaz, and the second one is Ta'alikat, the Edanda. And he wrote several small booklets at that time. So at that time, Said Nursi was rather involved in philosophical discussions and also on political issues. Particularly, he was writing in a religiously active journal called Volkan in Istanbul in the year 1909. This was before the infamous 31st of March event. This was a failed coup attempt by pro-Abdul Hamid officers, which Said Nursi was falsely accused of being involved and later on cleared in the court of emergency. Well, anyhow, there is an old Said era, which means the young Said, where Said Nursi was writing mainly on political issues, on social issues, on reform of the madrasa system, the religious seminary system of the East Anatolia. Said Nursi was rather interested in the issues of Kurdistan at that time, because he was coming from Kurdistan. He was really dealing with the backwardness there. He was looking for a solution, and a particular text, Hutbe-i Shamiya, the sermon in Damascus sermon, deals with the overall problems of the Muslim world and his solutions to the problems of the Muslim world. The additions to the Damascus sermon dealt also with the intellectual discussions of his time, whether it is the solidarity of religion or the solidarity of nation or ethnicity is important and so on. Because at that time, people were discussing, should we be Islamists or Ottomanists or Turkists, or at that time, it was called Turanism, Pan-Turkism. So there were several political trends at the time, and Said Nursi dealt with those issues also. These are Old Said era books and content. As I said, there are books that relate to the Metamorphosis period, particularly the Masnavi is like seedbed of the Epistles of Light, because the issues, the topics are going to be existential issues about faith, about belief in the hereafter, and so on. But the style is Old Said style. It is precise, it is very short, the language is highly sophisticated. Well, in fact, it was originally written in Arabic and so on. So Old Said is, you can look at Old Said either as a madrasa teacher, a professor at a madrasa, writing only for the other professors in the madrasa. You would know as an academic that academics write for other academics, not for the overall society. So Said Nursi wrote muhakamat, for example, deliberations or discussions, only for other professors, madrasa teachers and so on. But Said Nursi was not only that, he was also a political critic. He criticized Sultan Abdul Hamid's authoritarian rule. He later on criticized the Union and Advancement Party's policies. He later on will continue on criticizing the secularist approach of the newly established republic. But in the Old Said period, Said Nursi had this, strong language where he said, I have the truth and I'm going to give you the truth. You are in a position of passive recipient. In fact, at the beginning of one of his books, he says, the reader, you are just a spectator. I'm speaking not to you, but to my own imagined audience. Well, he says to a Japanese searcher of truth, you are a spectator, and a spectator does not have any right to criticize. You choose if you like it. If you didn't like it, don't take. That's it. Okay? But the new side is not like that. New side is more dialogical in the language. He tries to make things more understandable through analogies, through stories that is understandable to the plain mindset of Central Anatolia, because he was writing in Barla, and he knew that original readers of Risale Nur were basically uneducated villagers, farmers, and so on. So he had to go down to their level of understanding and make his message more approaching through metaphorical stories and so on. But of course, metaphor is the gateway to richness of understanding. So it's sudden a metaphorical language actually takes a text out of its historical context. Okay, so a metaphor about, say, at the first word, about a person who goes out to the Arabian deserts and takes on the name of a tribal leader and so on, was really meaningful in the Old Said period, because he himself traveled through the deserts of Mardin, and he had to take the name of Mustafa Pasha in order to protect him from bandits and so on. So he had the experience. Okay, historically that is meaningful, but the metaphorical story is not about bandits or about the tribal leader, or there is no desert. It's about this world, and the tribal leader suddenly becomes Allah, the Lord of this world, and so on. And that metaphor becomes so rich and so not bound by time that it becomes understandable to an English mindset or the American mindset also. So that made the Risale Nur what it is. So if, for example, well, for historical issues, we usually do not say hypothetically, but if Said Nursi didn't write the Epistles of Light, despite the fact that he dealt with almost everything he wrote in Epistles of Light in the Masnavi, we wouldn't have Said Nursi now. He would have gone forgotten altogether now, because that was a contextual book that needed a lot of information about the historical context he was writing in. But the new side, the al-Waqt, is a universal culture builder, and he appeals to Latin Americans, he appeals to Australians alike, because he uses a significantly different language. Not all of the work of the new side is universal. Not all of them are al-Waqt, because there are certain parts in Risale Nur which I will say should not have been translated into English at all, because they were not only time-bound, they're also valid only for those times and valid only for the Turkish context. Like, for example, the hagiographic texts within the Risale Nur. Said Nursi venerated the work that he actually wrote. He said, I translated it because the meaning belongs to the Quran, not to me. Okay. He was quite fond of the text, and yet those hagiographic texts are meant to be read only from within the Turkish context, not from without the text. In that sense, al-Zaman, Hüseyin Akarsu, for example, didn't translate those hagiographic parts of the Risale Nur. I think he did something right, because they are historical things that are valid only in those historical contexts. Hopefully, we will never have similar historical contexts where a secular dictatorship is going to impose its own understanding of religiosity on everybody and so on. Then we might need similar texts also.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent response to the question. We have been receiving very, very good questions on the chat box. So looking at the time, we generally keep it around 1 hour, but when there is interest, when there is, passion in the subject, we never limit the audience or the speaker from time. So we continue as much as we can. So if you would allow me right now, I just want to first announce that there will be a second session. So our next episode, inshallah, will be the continuation of today's topic. So we focused more on Ibn al-Waqt today, the son of his time in Said Nursi, and hopefully next time we will focus more on Abu al-Waqt, which is the upcoming part of the discussion. Yonara, if you have questions, please.
I do.
Okay, let's get her questions, because she's so patient and listening, and I'm sure she's burning with those questions, and then I will move into the chat box, the questions in the chat box.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Karim Balci, I think you've already answered this question, but I was reading about Said Nursi, and he has once declared that he said, I shall prove and demonstrate to the world that the Quran is an undying, inexhaustible sun by updating it to meet modern life requirements. And if I understood correct, you said the old said it's not bounded, it's not time bounded. With that being said, could you tell us if, the old said texts, are they still valid for discussion, or there is no use, in reading them?
Well, Yonara, thank you very much for the question. I touched a bit about this issue, like when I gave the example of Waterloo battle. Historical events are still valuable and they are valid, but we have to understand they are historical events. They are in the history. We extract lessons from those events. I'm going to try to explain this answer from Said Nursi's own understanding of time-bound context from within the Quran. Well, the word Said Nursi used is universal and particular. So this is because Said Nursi was a logician originally. He studied Greek logic and Islamic logic, and Greek and Islamic logic uses the term kulli, universal, and juz'i, particular. Okay, so what is the difference between universal and particular? Universal is actually at the level of conceptual understanding of things. So, for example, Yonara is a particular person, but human being is a universal concept. Okay, do we reach to the universal concept from Yonaras and Zuleyhas and Karims and others? Yes. We are not given the universal as an innate information. We are born into blank minds, and as a child, we actually collect information from the multitude of things around us, including human beings, and we meet our mother and father and sister and brother and so on. At some stage, we come to a conclusion that all of these are human beings. That is where we reach from a particular to a universal. Well, every text has information about particulars in it and some information about universals. Well, the information about universal is an existential information. The Quran is largely a text that has information about the universal, meaning it gives us universal principles. But here and there, we find in the Quran references to historical personalities, like Abu Lahab, for example. He is named in the Quran. He is referred to as a historical personality. Well, the point is, it's not a problem if we find a reference to a particular person in the Risale Nur, because we know Said Nursi is also a particular person. So human beings, human authors refer to other human beings as particular human beings. They have friendships, they have enmities, they have all kinds of relations with other human beings. They can refer to a particular cat, a particular horse, a particular desk, and so on. Okay? Because these are human authors. But what about God? God as the author. Of course, I'm using this term as metaphorical because we don't know what kind of relationship God and the Quran has. It's not a relationship of authoring from non-existence. It is actually a relationship of pouring from within his own existence into the words. We cannot know what kind of relationship God's authoring of the Quran is. But in order to better understand, as human beings, we use the term authoring. Okay, God gives us universal principles, but suddenly, at certain occasions, God refers to historical events. For example, the Surah Rum refers to a battle between the Persians and the Byzantines, which the Byzantines lost. And but the surah says soon Byzantines are going to win another war, and it happened actually. Well, it tells us particular stories of a lot of prophets: Moses, Ibrahim, and Isa, Jesus, and so on. All these are particular human beings. Haman was a particular human being that lived at in the biblical sources in Iran, in the Quranic sources in Egypt, as an aide to Pharaoh, and so on. Well, these are particular persons. Said Nursi asked this question: why on earth a book of universal principles, the Quran, which is a universal message, refers to particularities? Okay? If it is, for example, think of lawmaking. No law of a country, particularly constitutions, refer to a particular person. Rarely in authoritarian regimes, constitutions refer to the founder of the republic, founder of the state as, unquestionable leader and so on. But in the American Constitution, for example, you don't see references to particular places or particular persons or particular things. You see references to universal principles, freedom, equality, brotherhood, and so on in the French Constitution also. Why? Because they have to be universal in order to be valid for each and every occasion. Instead of saying Yonara is such and such, law books has to say human beings are such and such. Instead of saying Yonara has the right to ask a question in this program, I have to say every participant has a right to ask a question. Then it suddenly becomes a universal principle, not about a particular person. But in the Quran, there are particularities. What Said Nursi says is this, and it's not going to be easy to explain in a short, brief period of time. Said Nursi says, every reference to a particular incident or a person in the Quran is like the fruit of a tree that is behind the screen. We only see one branch of the tree in front of the screen and only the fruit. But the mind, the readers of the mind has to say, okay, I can see a fruit of a huge tree that is unseen to me, but that fruit is shown to me only to help me to reach to the trunk of the tree. Of course, our Lord is not torturing us. It's not only showing only one tree there and asking us to reach to the trunk, to the main body of the tree. It is showing us, he's showing us a lot of other branches. So it is like there's the story of people, blind people or blinded people touching different parts of the elephant and then drawing that part as the elephant. No, the Quran does not make that. Yes, all of us are blind with regard to the overall universal principle, but after each of us touching a part of the elephant or the tree, we are all given the equal information to bring them together. So this is the reason why we need a holistic reading of the Quran in order to understand those particular incidents. Without having appealed to the overall message of the Quran, you wouldn't understand why the Surah Rum is referring to the Byzantines and so on, or why Abu Lahab, he's just one particular guy who died, gone away, and went to the hellfire. Why he is mentioned in the Quran? Why this has to be valid for history? Well, it is valid for history. Only if you realize that any reference to a particular person or a particular incident is actually an invitation to the human mind to make up their understanding of the overall message. Well, then the second question comes, why? Why our Lord gives us the particulars and puts in front of us the duty, the task, difficult task of reaching to the trunk? Because he doesn't want all of us to reach to the same trunk. Because otherwise there will be dogma. All of us will believe in the same thing, and any religious system that imposes one single dogma, one single principle is unbearable. We wouldn't be able to live as Muslims. It's good that all of us touch some parts of the elephant and then we draw an elephant. By and large, all of the drawings will look like elephant, but in some of them, in the trunk of the elephant this time is going to be shorter or longer. It will certainly have 4 legs, but the legs might be a bit, thinner or thicker and so on. That is the mercy of our Lord. Instead of telling us universal principles that will become unbearable if they are closed principles. If they say every human being has this and that right, instead says Yonara has this and that right, and from there, and in another section it says Zuleha has this and that right, a different list, and from there we reach a conclusion that every human being might have Yonara's rights, or Zuleyha's rights, or Kerim's rights. In a village context, Kerim's rights are more meaningful. In a city context, Zuleyha's rights. In a metropolitan context, Yonara's rights might become more meaningful. So suddenly, that gives us the flexibility. But it is also a duty. It's a very heavy duty. Allah invites us to become co-authors of the meaning, not of the Quran, but of the meaning that we take off from the Quran. Well, Said Nursi does the same. I'm going to give one example which always impresses me whenever I read the Epistles of Light. This is in the Quran also, but very rarely people realize that the Quran makes this, I'm going to use the term trick, but actually it is named literary instrument. The Quran has its own literary instruments. One particular literary instrument is called missing text strategy. Missing text strategy. This means a narrative comes to a point, then suddenly jumps to another point, and it is left to you as the reader, human reader, to fill the gap. Of course, you cannot just put there anything. It has to be meaningfully linking the two edges of the story. Yeah, but you can make differences. Risale Said Nursi does this several times to us. He says, I'm going to write this issue in 9 points, that then gives us 8. The 9th point is not there. He says, I'm going to deal with this in 5 points. He comes to the 2nd point. On the 3rd point says, for some reason, I didn't write this. Well, why did you put it there then? Okay. If, for example, I was an author, if I was writing, if I decided not to write at one particular point, I would simply change it and say, I'm going to tell this in 4 points. Okay. Why he is leaving that there? Some epistles have only the name. Okay, it says 28 letter, but it is not written. Well, 28 letter is written, but I'm giving examples. Why? Because that is an invitation to the reader to become a part of meaning production. Come and write your own epistle with me, says Said Nursi. Well, that makes an author a great author. That makes an author al-Waqt, because then it becomes, the text becomes, text actually escapes from the boundaries of time. Text becomes universal. It becomes everywhere meaningful. And yes, you have to be ready. If you are an author, you have to be ready that in Scotland, people are going to fill that gap. The missing text is going to be written differently in Scotland, differently in Latin America, differently in Australia, and so on. And that is benevolence. Okay? Because I am a journalist and I am an editor of journalists. I have had this fight thousands of times. One of my contributors, I play with his words. I think he wrote it wrong. I review it, change it, and so on, correct the mistake. And then the next day I receive a call. It says, how come you play with my words and so on? That is my text. It is holy, Well, Said Nursi didn't say that to us. He says, come join. Become the co-authors of the Epistles of Light. Well, every reading, every creative reading is an attempt to become the co-author of a text. Well, that's an hermeneutical sentence which has a lot of meaning into it. Hopefully, in the next episode, we can delve into that particular topic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Balci. It is such an enjoyable session. I can't believe it's almost 90 minutes because it feels like just one moment in the present moment. But we have some questions that are coming to us from the YouTube chat box, and I would like to pick a few. And there are some Turkish ones which I will skip because it's not possible for me to translate them here. There are quotes from Said Nursi, so the language is, as you can imagine, you need to work on it for a specific time. But for the English ones, Bill Strong is asking this question, and Ercüment Said is actually second. He's asking the similar question with Bill Strong. The question is written as follows. Even Quran was translated and explained. Why are some of the followers so strict about not translating and explaining? And Ercüment Said says, does the Risale Nur need an extra simplification for today's people, Turkish or different origins?
Well, let me answer the second question first. Risale Nur does not need any simplification. The readers need the simplification of Risale Nur. It's not the need of the Risale Nur, it's our need. Similarly, the Quran does not need any translation. We need the translation to better understand, to at least approach to a better understanding. The understanding will never end. Abdul Karim Surush, the Iranian philosopher and theologian, once told me, there is Khatam al-Anbiya, the seal of the prophets, okay? But there is no Khatam al-Mufassirin. There is no seal or the last commentator. The commentary will ever continue on. Okay? That is the richness of a tradition. When you say the commentary is closed, well, Islam made a mistake of closing the gates of ijtihad in the 13th century. Well, let us not close the gates of commentary, at least. So commentary will continue on. The meaning formation continues on. That is the richness of the text. And, well, simplification is one form of writing commentary. In fact, we do make simplifications all around our lives. There's a language called the children language. Okay? There are complex realities, particularly abstract concepts, that are questioned by children at the age of 4 and 5. Okay? Every mother and father has been challenged with this question. Can God do this and that? Can God change it? Is God more strong than you, stronger than you? Is God stronger than everybody in the world? These are all about abstract concepts. Why I cannot see the God? That's an abstract question about abstract concept. You cannot answer those questions with theological vocabulary. You have to go to the level of the child. Okay. I love always to use this 3D pictures. You know, when you look at them from a perplexed viewpoint, you suddenly realize that the picture, which is 2D, has a 3D imagery in it. Okay, not all people can see it, but it also gives a sense to the children that there is a world that you cannot see. There are things that you cannot see. Well, human imagination moves from the concrete to the abstract between the age 4 to 8. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of questioning. Well, you translate it. You translate the language of the abstract into the language of the child. And you never think that this is something wrong. Okay? So we tell our stories, the Quranic principles in a simplified language. Well, every person, let me give you the wisdom of St. Paul from the New Testament. St. Paul advising other missionaries of Christianity says, don't give the people meat, give them milk that is processed, okay? Because everybody to the Christian message at that time was children, babies. So think of them as babies. They cannot eat meat. They can only take in milk. Many people, when particularly are approaching to the message of Risale Nur, Epistles of Light, or any existential text actually, and to the message of the Quran, are babies. Okay, so they have to be provided the milk. Well, do we have the milk of Risale Nur? No. Well, I personally wrote some children's stories in the past and published them, but unfortunately they are not in the market nowadays. I don't like them with my mindset now, but my child at the age of 9 still likes to read them. So it means that it was appealing to the children mentality. In anyhow, there are lots of things that needs to be done. It's not only translation to a different language or a different level of language, the translation to the language of visual communication, movies, cartoon movies, and translation to the language of music, art. These are all translations, and they all need to be done. Who needs that? We need that, not the Risale Nur. Let me turn back to the first question. Well, why there are people out there who do not want even a single change to be done in the text of the Risale Nur? Well, that is the issue. When you love somebody dearly, you hate any kind of change. You look at your beloved one's picture, even the picture you don't like, you say, this is not my beloved one. That is the issue. When you love and you feel yourself so much attached to a place, you dislike any possibility of a change. Well, I know some people, for example, they are so attached to their work table. You cannot even touch their things, you cannot move their pens and pencils and calculation machine and so on, because they are attached to the space, to the place. I know, for example, Hoca Efendi is so attached to his library. You cannot change the place of one book in his library. This does not need to be a logical issue. This is a subjective issue. Do we need to take their resistance into account? No. We have to understand, we have to respect, and in fact, we can even venerate. And we can say, amazing, these people are in love with the text of Epistles of Love. And good for them, but I'm not. I'm in love with the possibility that I can spread this message to the people who speak various different languages and various levels of languages. So some people preserve the text, some people preserve the meaning. When Said Nursi visited the reciters of Quran at quite a late time of his life, this was in Istanbul during the 1952 or 53, during the court case of the guidance to the youth. So he went to Sultan Ahmed. There was a competition of Quran recitators and so on. At the end of the program, he approached to the Quran reciters and he told them, you preserve the text of the Quran, okay? We preserve, as the epistles of light, we preserve the meaning of the Quran, okay? So some peoples, or some disciples of Risale Nur, they are in love with the text, let them be in love with the text. Some of them are so in love with the Ottoman alphabet of the text, the original writing of the Epistles of Light were written in Ottoman alphabet. So some of them still insist that they have to be written in Ottoman alphabet. Some still insist that they have to be written by hand and it shouldn't be printed in the printing machines and so on. Well, let me say this to you. This is not unique to Said Nursi. This is not unique to that particular group. You might think that they are, anachronical, they are living in a different era. And so, well, there are Christian and Jewish sects who still believe in handwriting of the text. Jewish religious documents, they can be printed, but you cannot use the printed document for particular religious ceremonies. The Torah roll has to be handwritten, okay? For particular Brit Milah and Bar Mitzvah ceremonies, these are religiously very significant ceremonies. You have to dance with the Torah roll, and that roll cannot be printed with machinery. It has to be handwritten. Well, this is Judaism. This is in a modern era. There are similar Christian groups who continue on writing and rewriting their holy text, it means that such level of dedication to a text is in human nature. Okay. Well, also similar level of dedication to the meaning has to be in the human nature, and we are at that side.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I would like to give you another question from the audience. Sabri Al-Yakut is asking this question. Without having full-fledged chronology of Risale Nur excerpts, how sure are you about Risale Nur that it is not a victim of historicality issue? That's the term he used. Despite the fact that it hasn't been even a century past since then?
Well, that's a beautiful question. That's a beautiful question. But this question is relevant only for the Ibn al-Waqt part of the Risale Nur. So we wouldn't be concerned with the existential issues like faith and theological discussions and so on. But certainly we are lacking some information in order to better understand some parts of the Risale Nur. I'm going to help the audience by explaining what Sabri is asking actually. Well, the point is this. We have a text of the Damascus Sermon in our hand. I am teaching at Respect Graduate School on Damascus Sermon and the lessons that we can extract from the Damascus Sermon on political issues. Well, Damascus Sermon belongs to 1911. It was actually preached in the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus in 1911. So this is the Ottoman era. But the original sermon was 9 pages long because it was 1.5 hours of preaching. It was 9 pages long. And we have almost the original one because it was published in 1912 in Istanbul. We know that that was the second print, so we don't have the first print, but most probably it is uniquely, the authentic version, original version. But later on, Said Nursi, a year later, added an addendum about solidarity, nationalist solidarity or religious solidarity issue. Later on in 1922, Said Nursi moved some parts to another book and added some new parts. Later on in 1951, when his students started to ask him about Islamic world, politics of Islamic world, particularly unity of Muslim countries, because this was after the Second World War, and some previously not independent countries, Muslim countries, started to declare their independence, and there was this hope for unity of the Muslim world again. And Said Nursi's students also asked questions, started to ask questions to them. Said Nursi said, I'm not dealing with politics, but let me translate to you what I have written back in 1912 and 1911 and 12. Well, the point is this, he came up with a book which is 153 pages. Well, the original was 9 pages. So he added a lot of explanation and so on. It does help us. But the point is, when you read the Damascus Sermon in 2021, you never know which part was written in 1911, which part was added in 1912, which part was taken off in 1922, whether the translation from Arabic to Turkish in 1951 was included commentary also, and so on. Said Nursi didn't stop there. He actually had his brother Abdul Majid translate his Turkish version of the Damascus Sermon back into Arabic because he wanted that message to be spread to the Muslim world also. And that translation is also completely different from the original text. Well, that needs a lot of craftsmanship in order to decide which sentence belongs to 1911, which sentence belongs to 1912, and so on. But does it matter to know which sentence belongs to 1911, which sentence belongs to 1951, if the overall message is still valid? Okay. Well, of course, this is important. Said Nursi says in Damascus Sermon, refers to the Second World War. When he refers to the Second World War, you realize that, well, this cannot be written back in 1912. This is certainly an edition in 1951. Okay, obvious. Okay. Well, there might have been people who have read the Damascus Sermon and thought that Said Nursi foresaw the Second World War. But it wasn't the case. Said Nursi added those sections only after the Second World War. But the point is this, the overall message of Damascus Sermon is this. The reasons of our Muslim world's backwardness are 6 main reasons, and Said Nursi gives solutions to those 6 problems. I'm not going to enter into those issues. The question mark is here. Without even knowing the historical chronology of publication of Damascus Sermon, can we still reach to the overall message or not? I'm saying whenever the message is time-bound, we need some kind of historical information to complete the map. Whenever it is an existential issue, whenever it is a theological issue, we don't need any kind of historical extra information. But Said Nursi helped us with the addendum, because he didn't only write the books like the words, the letters, the flashes, and the others, the core books of the Epistles of Light. He also wrote down collections of letters he sent to his disciples all around Turkey and even to Pakistan or to Arabia and so on. And from those letters, we can actually garner a lot of information about what Said Nursi was feeling when he wrote a particular part of an epistle. We can know, for example, at which particular farmhouse he wrote a particular epistle. And that creates such kind of information that helps us approach to the text as real. So, for example, Goethe has done this in the past. And as of 1920s, 1930s, writings of Goethe became so famous in Germany that there were trips, German people that were making literary trips. They were visiting a particular place where they knew that Goethe wrote that particular passage, and they read that passage there. Here in London, for example, you can join, well, not under COVID conditions, you can join several literary trips where you can visit the bar where George Orwell wrote 1948, 84. You can visit other places where, you know, Mark Twain wrote this particular poem and so on. So that actually gives flesh to the world. And we can do the similar things to Said Nursi's work if we make the craftsmanship, you know. This was about 20 years ago, I came up with an idea of a trip of light. So the idea was hiring a minibus and riding all around Turkey to the particular places that Said Nursi visited, lived, spent time, and so on, but together with the text that he created. You know, go to Barla, to the farmhouse of Paradise Garden, read the Paradise Epistle there, because it was written in that particular garden, okay? Mm-hmm. And then go down to Burdur and read the first gate of Nur there, because they were 13 lessons that were written in the city of Bordeaux and so on. In some cases, we know even the building that a particular epistle was written and so on. Well, do we need that? Well, we would benefit from that because it will give flesh to the text. Well, Orhan Pamuk did a very smart move when he actually built up the museum that was the topic of one of his novels. But you can go and visit the museum also and see all kinds of clothings and so on. Those clothings, actually, he gathered those clothings from bazaars and so on, old clothing bazaars. And then he used them. He studied the real Ottoman era or early Republican era garments. Even the colors, he used the real colors in the novel. And then when you go to Masumiyet Müzesi, the Museum of Innocence in Taksim, you will see precisely the same clothing there. And then the text garners flesh, life. Did we do that to Said Nursi? Well, there are some limited attempts to make that by drawings, doing some movies and so on, but we are far behind our Western colleagues of readers of Goethe, readers of Mark Twain, and so on. There are lots of things to do, precisely because the message is a universal message. If that's not a universal message, we shouldn't deal with the whole book. We can certainly come to a point and say, well, this Said Nursi is a great man. He did amazing things, but this particular issue is relevant and valid only for his time. As I said, the self-venerating hagiographic parts of the Risale Nursi shouldn't bother us when we are appealing to a non-Muslim Western audience and so on, because there is no need for that. The text speaks for itself. That is all I can say right now, but we do have another episode, yeah?
Yes, we have another episode. We have 2 questions left. Would you allow me to?
Please.
I mean, this is the shortened version of it because the questions are more, but at least as a representative of many questions that they ask from each person, I can ask one. So Ismail Özcan asking why he has not been known as a referable person by majority of Muslims in terms of faith-based issues and the methodology, etc. Why Said Nursi is not known in the West by majority of Muslims?
This is a beautiful question. There are 2 major reasons. First of all, Said Nursi was born in Turkey. And Muslim intelligentsia, particularly religious theological discussions, are dominated by Arabic-speaking world. And the Arabic-speaking world didn't have a chance to read and understand Said Nursi, particularly because the Arab world has a certain prejudice towards Turkey. Turkey is a secular republic. Turkish Islam is actually a kind of distorted version of the authentic Arabic Islam and so on. There might be some truth in their criticism of certain Sufi traditions in Turkey, but Said Nursi does not belong to those traditions. That prejudice is there, and that still is there. And the second one is Said Nursi is not a systematic theologian. Said Nursi didn't deal with a particular religious science. When we say religious sciences or Islamic sciences, we have 4 major sciences, theology, commentary, tafsir, and sirah, the biography of the Prophet or the tradition, and kalam, the theological issues. I'm not sure, yeah. Well, the point is this: Said Nursi didn't give a particular book in any one of these. Only the Isharatul Ijaz the science of inimitability, it's a difficult word, I know, is a systematic commentary of the Quran, and that is the most known book of Said Nursi in the Arab world, because it is systematic. It starts from Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, it continues with the exordium, the opening verses of the Quran, and then continues on Baqarah. Of course, it doesn't continue on further, because Said Nursi didn't mean to write the whole commentary of the Quran. He wanted to leave a message to the future generations of commentary writers with that. But still, that is the most known book in the Muslim world because it is systematic. Even when books are systematically written, they also need to be indexed, classified, footnoted, so as to appeal to an academic tradition. Well, Risale Nur is indexed, but there is no annotated bibliography of the Risale Nur books written in English yet. Most of the students of Risale Nur, even if they are academics of Risale Nur, they take on the same asystematic understanding of the message of Risale Nur. Said Nursi, when I say he was not systematic, he was intentionally asystematic. He didn't want to be a systematic commentator or systematic theologian and so on. He wanted to, as I gave to your imagination, the tree that is unseen, that is seen only bit by bit from here and there, that is precisely Said Nursi's Risale Nur. He doesn't give us the whole tree. He wants us to find the tree. He gives us just, small branches. In fact, at the beginning of Masnavi, he says precisely this. He says, you are going to see this book as an eclectic book that has no connection. The parts of it are not connected to each other. But when you look at it from a holistic perspective, you will realize that it is actually branches of a whole huge tree. But that is your task. That's not Said Nursi's task. Well, the point is, Said Nursi, the academia needs a new study of Said Nursi. First of all, contextualization notes, historical, date notes on where and when a particular epistle was written and so on. Footnoting. Said Nursi was not an academic. He was not trying to leave back a book that referred to every one of his sources. He refers to Saadat Aftazani, for example, Mullah Sadra, several times, but he never mentions the author. He never mentions the book. Of course, the Madrasa tradition had a completely different understanding of citation. It is not, a Chicago citation system or MLA citation system. It's completely different. But Said Nursi even didn't care about that. But in order to become appealable or appealing to an academic audience, Risale Nur has never reached to that level of study. That is a task. It's a difficult task, by the way. Going back to the sources of Said Nursi, I had to make a criticism here to the disciples of Said Nursi, including myself. Somebody has to establish the link between Said Nursi's writing and the 1400 years of Islamic tradition. The disciples of Said Nursi think that Said Nursi is a star in a dark, completely blackened, starless sky. There's only one star. Okay? Said Nursi might be the brightest star in the sky, but not alone. And in fact, Said Nursi is not a star. He is a moon. His light is coming from Muhammad, peace be upon him. His light is coming from the Quran. And that light is not coming directly. It is reaching to Imam Ghazali, Imam Rabbani, Fakhruddin al-Razi, Shah Naqshbandi, Sheikh Waliullah, and so on. From them, Said Nursi is reaching to a synthesis and presenting us the milk, as I said, in the St. Paulian sense. Well, to a baby, suggesting that you should think that this milk was actually blood and before then it was mud is torture. But that is precisely what an academic mind should be dealing with. You are given the milk, but study the mechanism from where this milk is coming. 1400 for Said Nursi. For us, 1500 years of Islamic generation, Islamic tradition is missing. We have to re-establish the link between Said Nursi and his mind makers, if you wish the term. I know in the Western context that might be a dangerous term, but his academic sources, let me say. That is yet to be done. So there are lots of things that needs to be done about Said Nursi. But I have to say, you know, we still have a lot of unpublished works of Said Nursi. You know? They're not even published. They're out there as handwritten notebooks, protected as a treasury by some of his disciples. In future generations, we will say, why these people have kept those notes to themselves? Now we are better understanding what he was trying to tell us. Just because of those notes, we didn't, because they were not published. So we still have unpublished manuscripts. I know that there are lots of letters unpublished. Some of them are referred to on secondary academic sources and so on, but from there we are trying to gather information, just because the primary source is yet to be reorganized and republished. It was not done. It is completely understandable why the world is not so much interested. This is the same. This is true for particular commentators of the Quran. For example, when you look at the most famous commentary written in the Muslim history, you will find names like Baydawi. You will find names like Radi, Fakhruddin al-Radi. You will find names like though it's Zamahshari. Why? Do you know why? Not because these are the most famous commentaries in the Muslim world or most successful. These are the ones that were catalogued, indexed by Western academics. And inescapably, even the Muslims find it easier to reach to them because the cataloging and the indexing is well done with the most developed methodology of Western academia. So you are able to find in Index Islamicus what a particular commentator says and so on. You are able to reach to the content of Zamahshari much easier than the content of, say, Al-Malullah Hamdi Yazr, for example. I believe Hamdi Yazr is far ahead of Zamahshari in his understanding of, particularly because Al-Malullah is the 20th century commentator. But, well, it's not still translated into Arabic. There's no index, no cataloging, no referral system and so on, no footnoting system for the book. So there are lots of things that we need to do. I hope the Risale Nur Academy, soon to be launched, are going to take on some of those tasks. It is an amazing, huge task, I know. It is not just to put on all those tasks on Zuleyha's shoulders, but we have duties.
I'll try my best to make it happen with your support, and the scholars, other scholars. Thanks to all of them. So last question. I don't want to finish the program without asking this question, because this Isha Arun asked 4 questions. I'll just put one because I know she can ask you the others later.
I know. I have been watching your programs, and every time Isha is there, and usually with 4 or 5 questions. Yeah.
Yes, so she deserves to be mentioned here. Her first question is actually not her first question. This is the third question, but I picked this one. Language aside, do the literary techniques used by Nursi also play a similar role, such as metaphors or fictitious comparisons? And there is an addition to the question. Some metaphor examples are found in other world cultures too, such as the comparison of a man at the bottom of a well and Russian literature.
Yeah.
Do the literary techniques used by Nursi also play a similar role, such as metaphors or fictitious comparisons?
I think fictional comparisons, not fictitious, but fictional. I assume so. Well, the point is this. First of all, our second episode of this discussion, let me say, is going to be precisely about the literary instruments that Said Nursi has used in order to unbound himself and his text, his work, by the boundaries of time and culture. And I gave already a literary instrument example with the missing text strategy. But I have detected about 30 very successful strategies Said Nursi have used by means of style. The asystematic system of Said Nursi is also by means of the style. Said Nursi's language is a broken language, but intentionally broken. And he says that I'm using this broken language intentionally because I am broken. I'm broken. I'm actually perplexed. I'm living in a society that is looking for guidance, you know. And yes, I am trying to provide you with a guidance to the perplexed mind, but I myself am perplexed also. And the perplexed mind should produce its work with a broken language, he says. Well, in fact, that broken language gives us amazing opportunity to become a part of meaning creation process. And there are, well, it's not easy to translate these issues into English because the original is half Arabic, half Persian, half Turkish text, and suddenly some of them are even misspelled writings. On, for example, fate, Said Nursi has used some sentence. It says, if somebody criticizes predetermination, in that sense, fate, criticizes predetermination, he hits his head to the iron, I don't know how you call the earth, but breaks his head. Okay? Well, this is a misspelling. But Said Nursi kept it there as misspelling. He knew it was misspelled and he kept it there as it is. Because we know from an Arabic version of this precise text that he was saying completely something different. But Said Nursi believed in multitude of manuscripts. A Jesuit academic studied the differences between the various manuscripts of the stories of saints in 16th and 17th centuries Central Europe. And he claims that those manuscripts, the same story is being told with differences here and there. That is the enriching strategy. Okay? So it's good that you have differences, because those differences opens the gate to mental discussions. I always give this as I have been teaching Greek logic also. Well, the books of Aristotle and later on the other Greek philosophers on logic has been translated into first Assyrian and then into Arabic in early 8th and 9th centuries. The original translations had some defects. For about 100 years, Muslim logicians discussed issues that was mistranslated. The original translation was wrong. Aristotle never said that. But 100 years, tons of epistles were written about that mistranslated word. Was it a waste? No. Amazing new horizons were opened because of that mistranslation. Okay. Well, some parts of the Epistles of Light, misspelled parts, Said Nursi left the text unapproachable. That actually opened a treasury in front of us. That one. But on other occasions, Said Nursi intentionally used literary devices or instruments to help mobilize Muslim mind. Nursi realized that the real problem of the Muslim intellect is by the closing of the gates of ijtihad in 13th, 14th century, Muslim mind started to replicate whatever has been taught already. So we became a tradition of just, referring to what our forefathers said about a particular issue, instead of creating new information, new strategy, changing the paradigm, looking at the issue from different perspectives, and so on. That creativity was lost. And in fact, the Muslim mind became, stumbled. It wasn't doing anything. It wasn't producing meaningful knowledge. And Said Nursi was trying to mobilize the Muslim mind once again. So he gave us difficult tasks. At the end of the Qizil-Ijaz is difficult to translate into English. Once again, it is read inimitability. But this is a book about Greek logic. Okay. Well, the point is, what he has written about is actually high school level logic. Okay. Every one of us studied logic in high school. If we were in Turkey, it's a high school level logic. Said Nursi is not an amazing master of logic and so on, but the text he has written needs PhD level understanding of Arabic and logic in order to understand him. And in the end, he says why he did that. Right? He says, just to make you force your minds to work, just to force you to carefully analyze what I have said, I have written this epistle in this particularly difficult, inimitable way. And I know some of you won't be able to understand it at all. He said that at the end of the book. So even the language is a part of the overall message. Let me finish with this. I asked this question, what is understanding? What is the meaning of a text? And I said only one option. The meaning is the intention, the intended meaning of the author. This is the classical Aristotelian understanding of the meaning. And in fact, throughout Muslim history, this has always been the dominant understanding of true understanding. The Muslim understanding is this: whenever you approach maximum amount to the original intention of the author, you understood the text good. Well, there is this challenging question. Is there a possibility that a reader understands a text better than the author? I'm not going to answer that question today. But Said Nursi believed that some of his readers are going to understand the epistles of light better than Said Nursi. And in fact, just in order to induce that feeling among us, he did this trick. Occasionally, he was reading from the very epistle he wrote. And by the way, I have to underline, he kept the whole text of Epistles of Light in his memory. So he didn't need to read it because it was all in his memory. He had an amazing memory. But sometimes he was reading from the epistle and he used to say, subhanallah, this means I am shocked. I have read this piece 100 times. I have never understood this as such. Well, you have written it. Okay, whatever your intention was, you know of your intention. But he says, after reading it 100 times, I now am able to better understand it. Better than when I wrote it. Well, this is a new horizon. This is amazingly postmodern, by the way. Far ahead of Said Nursi's own age. We are only now discussing whether a reader can better understand a text better than the original author. And well, the deconstructionist postmodern trend is to say yes. And Said Nursi was actually trying to convince us that we have an opportunity to read and understand Risale Nur, Epistles of Light, better than Said Nursi himself. Well, many of Said Nursi's disciples who are in love with the text are also in love with the author, Said Nursi. And if they hear that I can better understand Risale Nur than the author of Risale Nur, Said Nursi, they will probably think I am, I'm crazy. At best, of course, if they don't find any other denigrative term. But yes, we have to be open to the idea that we can understand Risale Nur better than Said Nursi himself. Okay. Well, then that means that is the benevolence of the author, to be open to the idea that the reader becomes first the co-author, but then he becomes even the dominant author. And that is only if we are open to that idea, that possibility, the Risale Nur, and through the Risale Nur, the overall beautiful message of Islam is going to be relevant for remote lands of the world, where we will need people who will better understand the message for their own contexts. When in Surah Yasin, there's a particular verse that challenges humanity. It says, you cannot get out of the boundaries of the sky, illa fi sultanin mubin in Arabic, without an open and strong authority. Sultan means authority. Well, traditionally, this was always understood as if God does not give you authority to leave the outer space, you will never be able to leave the outer space. Today, we read the same text and we say Sultan is space ships. Okay, that is an authority. So we better understand compared to the 1400 years of history. This doesn't mean they misunderstood. For their era, that was the best understanding. For our era, this is the best understanding. Said Nursi gives us a very beautiful principle. He says, this particular verse of Quran tells me in my particular situation, at this particular time, this particular meaning. But I let the future generations to understand different meanings from the same text. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this has not become a tormenting experience. I hope that the length of the discussion is not going to discourage people from watching the next episode.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kerim Balci. It was such a great session. It feels like a moment extended out of time for almost 2.5 hours, as if it's a moment when the time is extended and it's beyond the limits. So thank you so much for a great session, and we look forward to the next one, inshallah. I don't know if Yunara wants to say anything about this whole session today. Yanara?
I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. And I hope it's as long as this one was, because it's fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would like to finish by saying that Risale Academy School is starting at Respect Graduate School, starting on September 11th for the first session, which we will have in general 3 different sessions and 2 courses in each session. The first session will have Tawheed and Nubuwa as topics for a transformative knowledge of the Quran, inshallah, through the lenses of the Risale Nur collection. And our next session of this discussion will be on July 4th at 4 p.m., which is another very special day because we will be celebrating American Independence Day that day. So there will be lots of fireworks and, it will be an amazing day, just like today. And we'll continue with Mr. Kerim Balci on the question of, is Said Nursi the son of his time, or is he the father of his time? So we will focus on the second part of the question. And contextualizing Risale Nur and Said Nursi, the connection between the text and the context. Thank you so much, Mr. Kerim Balci. It was a fascinating session, and we look forward to see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yanara.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Have a wonderful time until the next episode.